Okay, just kidding.
But before we start, I want to ask Catherine something. Yeah, so you said, yeah, so we have this 400-year history legacy, and we've only really had this, let's say, the legal framework for 55 years. Was there anything else that makes you feel optimistic? Anything else?
Yeah.
What keeps you from despairing?
Okay, so I have despair days. I have very rough days. To be honest, and I say this all the time, my mother went to Central High. How many people know about the Little Rock Nine? You know, you gotta put them up higher. I can't see all that, right? So the Little Rock Nine were 9 kids that integrated Central High in
1958.
That's my student right there. She's awesome. And so when she did, she integrated. So the year after the Little Rock Nine went to Central closed because they didn't want any more students to be educated with their white students. So they closed and they tried to take all of their revenue and open up private schools, but they couldn't afford it. So they eventually opened the school back up. When they opened the school back up, my mother went. And I always marvel at the fact that I ask her all the time. She tells me about the stories. She would tell me that she would walk up and down the hallways, right, on her way to class, and the other kids would ape her, literally, like that. And I would always marvel at the fact that she was not angry and bitter, like furious, en masse at these other students. And she's always been very clear to me that she knows who she is. She's not waiting for somebody to explain that to her. And that just because you aped me has nothing to do with you. Leave it there. You know, and I had them come speak as guest speakers in my class because one of the things that I marvel about is they lived during segregation. Like where they grew up, there were black police, and black police couldn't police white people. They lived during this period. We're all broken up right now because, you know, people are saying mean things to us. They lived in a period where my uncle used to attend, when he attended high school, they had this thing where if you caught a black male by himself, it was a game that the white males played, that they would beat him up. And they caught him at the end of the school year with bottles and a bat, a broken bottle, and they beat the crap out of this guy. And he never went back to that school. It was Central High School. And he's not bitter. He's not bitter. Not because he sees the better angels in people, but because he individually blames those kids, but not all kids. So that's how I grew up. I wasn't permitted to indulge in these racial flights of fancy. My mother was very clear. We're all people. If no one gets to judge you, you don't get to judge anyone. So that's the answer to my question.
Thanks. I ask because I just have been dismayed at how quickly things devolve, at least publicly in the public eye. And I agree with you, there's real changes in our society, certainly demographically with mixed families, with people from different countries coming in. That's always a story of America. And that is a powerful force. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is this reaction, again, we talked about this, of whites who are afraid of not being dominant anymore. But still, I had hoped that we were more evolved by now.
I don't think we've devolved. I don't. What I think is that we got to a place in history where we were supposed to like put a happy face on it or whatever. Like, okay, we have the Civil Rights Act and woo, no more racism, right? And so instead of anybody dealing with those feelings, we just, and we made them illegal, right? And so at some point, someone or something came along and said, nah, you can feel those, you can be pissed and racist, because we've never processed them. Like, how many of you have honestly sat in a conversation with someone who is physically polar opposite of you? I know you have. Put your hand down. But how many of us do that and have these uncomfortable experiences? Some people do, and we all like to believe that we do. But I also think we spend a lot of time not doing that on purpose, right? And so now we're in the season where people are like, I don't have to shut up now. MAGA, like, right? And so we haven't developed the skill set to have these conversations. We haven't developed I'll tell you this.
I don't think we developed the language to do it. The actual language, the actual words that is somehow non-accusatory or somehow.
I don't think we need to be non-accusatory. That's some crazy
You know what I'm saying?
stuff. I do. I guess, so I say this. So I have my daughter's 20, how old is the girl? 22, 21? You forget? I do. She's not 19. Okay, whatever. So I have an adult daughter now, but when she was in the, third grade, okay? So I'm sorry, I have this whole thing about my mother again, not standing up. But so when she was in elementary school, she won some, little small award. And because of it, she got to go in the front of the lunch line during lunch. So she goes to the front of the lunch line, and some white kid is furious because he wants lunch too. And he says to her, little black girls have to get in the back of the line. Right, all your eyes open? She had no idea what he was talking about. None. And so all of the adults in that exchange, all the adults were furious. Right? So I got a call, his parents got a call. They said, we need to come up and have a gathering and circle it up and talk to everybody. And, this was wrong. I flat out refused to do it because they were little people and they needed to bring their skill level to the discourse. So, of course, someone explained to her what the kid meant. And I frankly, to this day, I don't think he knew what he meant. I think he knew it was mean, but not exactly why, because they're both elementary. Anyway, somebody tells Maya what the little boy meant. And Maya finds him the next day at school. And she says, I can't believe you said that to me. And little Timmy just cried, right? He was brokenhearted because they had the conversation. It's not an easy conversation to have. But we got to have it, honestly. And I don't think the language is difficult. I think she probably, in her own way, said, little Timmy, you're an in her own way, right? And he was like, I like you, and I didn't mean to hurt you, Maya. We're supposed to also have cookies tomorrow. Sorry. And they could relate as people. I think we've got to go back to that. There's no way around this if we don't do that. None. That's just my opinion. Also, I think you're awesome.
All right. I think we're monopolizing the question time.
Right, we are.
Questions?
Talking to each other. But
Question?
Right. So just first of all, I'd like to say thank you to you guys for coming to talk to us about this. I think it's a very important conversation and topic to have, especially in this day and age. And my question is more for Catherine, but Asby, please feel free. You mentioned voting and how states used identification to keep people from voting, but one thing you didn't mention was gerrymandering, and I was wondering about your thoughts on that, and if we could see it going away sometime in the near future. Obviously, hopefully, we know how it's used to segregate and boost Republican or Democratic votes in certain areas, but just wondering on your thoughts.
So did you know that, what was his name? Karl Rove. There was a point after Bush left office where Karl Rove said, I struggle with letting certain members of the electorate vote. And so I'm going to gerrymander districts so that their vote has less power. And we're going to spend the next decade doing that. And he was very obvious about it. He minced no words about it, right? And 10 years later, here we are with these crazy districts that put all the black people in one district and then spread out the white people in the other 11 districts. So consequently, there's difficult representation. If your question is, do I think it will go away? My answer is yeah. and I always say this to people. Who was the guy, there was an editor recently who wrote an editorial about how the Klan needs to come back and do like this ethnic cleansing, right? And he was recently fired. He retired. And he was replaced with a black woman. And what I always say is that I'm not your grandpa's. My voice is as powerful as his. And so now that we know these things happened, and now that we have all decided we're not going to live with it, nobody has to. Nobody has to. Like, look at, shoot nuggums, is it Florida? Where is it? Where the person is now giving testimony that she faked a bunch of absentee ballots, and North Carolina. North Carolina needs to stay out the news, don't they? Right? But the point is, nobody's going for that anymore. So yeah, I think it'll stop. I think we'll make sure it does.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to stand up too. And we had a lot of conversations also earlier about this too. I think obviously it goes on. It's difficult to stop because let's say whites and also let's say GOP see a certain advantage in a certain way of doing that. And again, it's not that Democrats have never done that, but it is, we associate this much more with white suppression efforts of black vote, minority vote. But one thing is, I don't know why whites who support that don't see that it's corrosive to themselves, to the public interest, to the ideals that we should hold, that should be a core of our identity as Americans, for instance. I'm speaking as an American, and not everyone here is. Why people don't see that any gain is a short-term gain, but the corrosion, the damage it does, I would want to say both to the body politic and to the individual psyche, is long-lasting. And again, this is one reason why it takes so long to change it. This destruction, this erosion of these ethical and other values. So, yeah, it's like, you can take a jolt of caffeine and artificially, power up. But if you really want to have a healthy, long-lasting energy level, stable society, you can't do that. White people themselves will ultimately, already are suffering, I want to claim. We see what happens and how vulnerable whites are also to all kinds of ridiculous manipulation based on that fear that's been instilled in them. So I question that a lot, and this is a conversation I end up having with people in my community, my relatives, et cetera, about these issues. Why do you think this, why don't you see how bad this is for you yourself? But people think if it's a game of advantage, they want the advantage.
I have a question for you. What's your name?
Brad.
Say again?
Brad.
Brad. Do you think it'll change?
I hope so.
See how he changed that word? I said think, he said hope.
Yeah, well, I would like it to faster than I assume it will.
Child, faster. So the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1960. No, the Voting Rights Act, 1965. The Voting Rights Act was 1965. So that's 35 plus 19, 54 years, something like that. Don't double check me. Like 54 years that we have been at that practice of equal voting. So I guess I'm wondering faster how, and where does that start? Like, who does that? Who's supposed to be making that change? And I asked my entire class this. I'll use a different example. I had a family friend come over for Christmas, and he started going off about how Bernie should have won. Bernie Sanders should have won. And so I let him say all of his story. And then I had one question for him. Did you vote? Want to guess what his answer was? Stop asking the question, man. Do the work. I'm not saying you're not. I'm just saying that my mother's had her generation had its run. my generation, you're up. You're up. None up. Like, no one's going to save you. Right? You're up. All right, Brad. Yay.
Yes, I was a police officer in Washington, D.C., so
Yay.
yeah, I wanted to see what you had to say about that. You said, don't even get me started. Actually, I wanted to share a couple stories because some of the things that happened to me when I was a kid, kind of I reflected on it when hearing your stories. So I was taking a road trip with my parents, and we were driving from Ohio to Louisiana. We're going to New Orleans to visit my stepdad's daughter. I think I was like 7 or 8. And we came up on this checkpoint. I don't know what state it was. And then it was either, it was somewhere in the south. And like my stepdad, he's a Vietnam vet, a badass dude, really tough guy.
What
But Army. But anyway, I saw him tremble a little bit. He was a little nervous. I never seen him nervous. And then I noticed a lot of these people were collecting money. Every car, they would give money, they'd let the car go. And then all of a sudden, it was our turn, and they were KKK guys. And he gave money, and I was really shocked. I'm like, I thought he was a tough guy. Why is he giving
Survival
money?
skills, man. Don't sleep.
And everyone gave money. It didn't matter what race they were. They all gave money, and they kept going. So that was really crazy.
Yeah, that's one of, so this is why I was telling my class about this the other day. So let me just say a couple things. One is that the love of my life is a cop. So I'm not fundamentally opposed to police at all. I'm fundamentally opposed to bad policing, fundamentally, until the end of time. And I always think that if cops really were concerned about it, they'd clean their own houses. They wouldn't wait for the public to come find them. That's just me.
Right.
But I've never felt so powerless than when I am on the other side of one of those experiences. And it's strange because as a black woman, I don't know. I was explaining this one story where, I was stopped. I may have cut a cop off. I may have cut him off when I was turning. And I'm not saying I did. I might have, right? And so I was stopped. And the first thing the cop said to me when he walked up is, "Do you have any warrants?" And that it infuriated me. That infuriated me because it was a bully move. Like, if you really wanted to know, run my plates, man. You know how to do this, right? So me and my arrogant little butt, I took my driver's license and flicked it out the window. Ooh. I know, right? What? And then I rolled my window up. And so while this is going on, I look over and there's another cop on this side. My window had been down. He had his head. I was literally talking to cop A in my glove compartment. And when I look over, this other cop is looking in my glove compartment. So now I'm really pissed. I roll that window up too. He's leaning in my car. I'm gonna kill you, right? I felt entitled to be righteous and indignant, but I don't feel like my husband could do the same thing. I don't feel like my sons can do the same thing. I feel like if they do that, they die. Yeah. So, how do I feel about cops? I don't know. I just told you I don't permit myself to generalize. If you're dirty, I'm gonna come look for you.
Yeah, I mean, what you did was very dangerous.
Oh my God, you're so right. I know that now. I know it was
whether
right.
you're black or white or anyone.
Right. It worked out well.
Yeah.
It worked out well.
Before I became a cop, I was being followed by a police officer, and my girlfriend was sitting next to me, and she was blonde, blue eyes, whatever. And I told her, I was like, "Hey, sit over there," because she was kissing on me. I was like,
"Don't
go over there."
Girl, you better, right.
Yeah, and she's like, "Oh no, they would never. They're not going to pull us over. Who would do that?" And of course, lit me up, pulled me over.
Did you hear about that kid? Guy was dating the police chief's daughter or something, and she was white and he's black.
Yeah.
So he waited.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to share my experience of why I think it's kind of going downhill in the police or law enforcement in general, and I think it's mostly because of lowering the standards to recruit more women, more minorities. And it didn't open the door to more women and minorities. It opened the door to more weak white men, in my opinion. No, it's true. And they're afraid of black people. I've worked with these guys. They're just afraid of black people, and it increases a lot more confrontations and more shootings.
Right.
In my opinion.
Well, okay, so is there anyone in law enforcement that wants to speak up on the issue, or? Because I'm not in law enforcement, but my entire focus is to prosecute dirty cops when I find them. So I'm a little hard to be balanced about that. Yeah.
Prior to coming here, only about 4 months ago, I was working with the LA County Sheriff's Department. So, and I worked in a different environment, worked inside the county jail after working on their metro line. And I do have a different opinion as far as if it's going downhill or not. There are a lot of things that I've seen in my own department where I was like, you shouldn't be a cop. You shouldn't be a cop. You shouldn't be a cop. You get a car. You need to just go away. And the standard, I understand that there are.
But do you understand why he's saying
Yes.
it feels like it's gone downhill?
I see why it would feel
Okay.
that way. I get that because the kind of people that we do have that I've worked with, I asked them, I work inside the county jail. The LA County Jail is one of the largest jails next to the prisons inside the state of California. And
Yeah, I've done work
we
with
work with
LA
some
County
rough
jails.
people.
Right.
And to the point to where I feel like I was a glorified babysitter. Yet, when I sit next to some of these people that I work with, I'm like, how are you so intimidated by these people? And then I have to look at where they come from. A lot of the people that I've worked with have never been to Southern California, or they've never, like that was their first job after high school. Mommy and daddy paved the way through college. Then they come to this job thinking that it's the greatest benefits that I could have, the best kind of work that I can do, for some for no education. And yet, so the environment is a little different. They're not as strong on doing actual policing because it's a different environment for them. They rather just be there for the sake of knowing that that's a position. They think, well, I've got this patch on, so I'm good, but there really isn't much that goes with that. So I get that.
I do. I think
People
it's a
think.
fair question. I mean, I
Yeah.
do. I for most people who don't peddle in this, and I do. I mean, it truly is the focus of, has been the focus of my career for years, police misconduct. But for most people, this is all new. All these videos and stuff, you're like, when did this crazy stuff start happening? For those who have been involved, I strongly feel like this isn't new. But it's new to most of us, most of America, most of the world. And so I am of the opinion, and it's just me, that I appreciate that it's out there now. I do. Not so that we can vilify anyone, but so that we can sort of clean house and say, okay, we all have we're all on the same page. But if you could just let Jack go, right? So is it new? But it's great that it's out there. It's great to me that it's out there. So I know you were in line. I'm pretty sure you probably had a different question, but I appreciate you weighing in for that.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I grew up in Los Angeles as well.
These Californians, what's going on in here?
I wanted to talk about the racial disparity amongst minorities. So
Do you mean in the minority community?
in the minority community, in particular, I think about the LA riots and the disparity between Korean Americans and African Americans during that time. And then, of course, noted instances with even Latinos and the African American community or Asians even. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on erasing the lines between those, because we share a lot of similar backlash against racial majorities that single us out and stereotype us.
So I think it's hugely important that we don't erase the lines. Like I want Latinos to be Latino and blacks to be blacks, and all of us to be running around in the same pool anyway, right? And so I don't, just in terms of language, I always say, people look at me, and I used to have friends that used to say, when I look at you, I don't see you as black. I'm like, child, I'm black. See me as black, right? So I don't like to erase those lines. But I think that the tension and the exchange are good. I think that non-blacks and non-Latinos look at us as minorities. I think that blacks have one kind of racial disparity, and I think Latinos have a different kind. Like everybody's coming, people will see a Latino person in the United States and go, but are you here legally? And people will see a black guy in the United States and go, have you committed crime? So I think that we have different targets on our backs, but I think that we have targets, and so we can at least relate on that part and argue about everything else, truth be told.
You know, spending time in Asia, then, you know, if any of you have traveled around, you know, you see different kinds of discrimination in different Asian countries against other Asians. We see this very commonly. We see lots of discrimination pretty much anywhere we go. The United States has a particular history and structure, you know, political and economic, where because whites are dominant, almost, I think, every minority group is pitted against each other in a kind of competition for second place, so to speak. You know, blacks, I think, have, blacks have, you know what I'm saying. Blacks have it's only blacks who were brought as slaves, though, where a large population were brought as slaves with all of those structures, Jim Crow. It did work against Asians. There was lots of oppressive laws against Asians, yes, but blacks have a particular history of that, and it has real consequences now for everything from education to other opportunities. So I think without that dominant structure of convincing people that they're, you know, rivals, things would be different. But we look at every country pretty much. This is not in any way excusing it. People find a way to exclude some group for whatever reason. And even in Japan, the Kanto people didn't like the Kansai people, you know? And don't even talk about people who have been here for generations from Korea or from China. So to me, you would think, yes, people should see their shared situation and find some way to coalesce. And maybe you're aware of cases in legal cases that where it was brought by a person of one minority group that benefited many minority groups. I think that certainly happens, and that can happen. But yeah, it sort of did baffle me too, to see so much antagonism between blacks and Koreans at the time of those riots. Yeah.
But I just want to add, do you have siblings? What's your name?
Alex,
Alex, do you have siblings?
I have 2 brothers.
Okay, so you know how sometimes when your mama catches you doing something and she's really hard on you and you're like, oh man, she let you get away with that. And you're like, no, she let you get away with this. And so everybody feels like they're a little bit victimized by, you know, the truth is the different races are going to have their own experiences of victimization, but we're, you know, it's all still our same parents. It's okay to disagree about who mom likes better, right? As long as we never stop talking about it or fighting about it. For the record, my mother likes me the best. Okay, so there are a lot of people back there and we don't have a lot of time, and I want to make sure I get everyone's question because this really is it's great to talk about this openly, right? Hey, you got it. Go ahead. Tell me your name again.
Brittany.
Brittany.
I just want to touch back on what you were talking about earlier with, is it getting better as far as the conversations surrounding race? I ask this because I have a lot of friends and family who are really upset that now that we are talking about race, and now that we are talking about issues in the past and learning the truth about things, it's come down to, well, yes, it happened, but you as African Americans need to finally get over it. And it's to the point where they feel like, how come we cannot
Oh my God,
express?
my favorite comeback to that is, okay, I'll get over mine if you burn the Confederate flag.
True.
Okay, so
But it's more like because I know that comes down also to the tension that they put between African Americans and other races. Well, at least in California, you don't see the Koreans, being like this. You don't see the Hispanics being like this. Like Hispanics used to be the people that they always put down. And now it's like, well, they're working hard. Yeah, that may be illegal, but what are you guys doing? You guys are always in jail and doing this and doing that. So where does someone come in to try to be, like, they want to have their conversation and be able to finally stress the points that have made the past what it is now, but they can't do that in an environment people are telling them to relax.
I will tell you this. I don't let anybody tell me what I should be upset about and not. Like, I get that. I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of friends all over the country, and we all have different experiences and different, and some people think it's time for me to move on. But I would ask you this. If, let's say, hypothetically, I'd been molested, who among you tells me when I'm done with that? Who tells me I should be over that feeling, right? Nobody. I tell myself. And that's the same with racism. So I don't engage in those conversations. I really don't. If you think I should be done, it's your problem, not mine. It's long and short of it. So I don't know if Ash asked.
Yeah. We see this all the time. It's a kind of, I see it as a sort of a way of making excuses for not dealing with the issue and not accepting, responsibility to work for the changes that need to happen. In other words, it's another way of saying, why don't you go to somebody saying, well, we don't want to change anything more than it's already been changed. Now, many of you probably remember, after Barack Obama was elected president, some commentator, I want to say conservative commentator, said, well, that just proves there's no more racism in America. Whereas many of us saw that as, well, looks like there are some routes for opportunity for some particularly driven people who managed to build the kinds of political coalitions necessary. They can achieve the presidency. This man achieved the presidency, but it doesn't mean racism is over. So this, I just see it, when we see how reconciliation processes are developed and unfold in places like Rwanda, or other countries where there have been terrible genocides of one group against the other. Often it does mean, okay, let's just agree to move forward. But it does also include a settling of accounts, of admissions and of evidence and stories and histories about what actually happened. So I do think the United States needs a reconciliation process. I don't know what a particularly American racial reconciliation process would look like, but I want to see it happen. I'd like to help it come about. But I do think the situation is that serious. And without that happening in some form, and again, the law has a role to play, but we're talking about norms and relations. And I think it requires, again, Catherine said, talking, but I think I'd like to see that happen. Next guy.
All right. First thing, I just want to say thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it from both of you guys. So I have kind of a small loaded question and then just a short comment, if that's okay. So my question is, at what point do the symbols or meanings of like words and flags and things like that change? As we see like language change over time and like different contexts and different languages and different environments, when can we see the change of like something per se, the Confederate flag or something like that, change over time?
Yeah. Okay, I'll start and then maybe she'll pick up. Things do change, but also symbols, language, names are deployed. They're actually used in a certain way, either to emphasize values, for instance, to identify a group. In the case of the Confederate flag, this has been ongoing. And it can, sort of degenerate into a, just a symbol on a truck that may not have any real deep meaning, except it can also be used by groups for their specific ideological, political, or other purpose. So, and it's amazing how easily these things are revived. Symbols can be revived. Lately, I've been having an interesting conversation, or let's say, argument with some of my cousins, because I say that the MAGA hat in the future will be seen as an incredibly shameful symbol. I think this will be seen as the equivalent of the Nazi symbol. And my cousin who loves Trump said, how can you say that? It's just a hat, blah, 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 you're just a lib. But I do think that symbol will change. I do think people will be will feel the need to disassociate themselves from the values and the meaning and the things that have been done and could be done from now in the name of that. So they can change, but it often requires a real effort. Now, after the Nazis, were defeated in Germany, that symbol, the Nazi symbol, the swastika, was expunged. Basically, became illegal to display that. Even to the point of, you have a plastic model kit of a German airplane, they couldn't put decals, historically accurate decals, to expunge that symbol. It didn't kill the symbol. It lives on as an underground, powerful underground symbol, and that will erupt and continues to erupt. But I think acknowledging the power and the meaning of what was done with that symbol, as the representative, it's something that has to happen.
I'm not entirely sure I understand your question. What's your name?
Jeff.
Jeff. Can you ask it for me one more time?
Yeah, so do you want me to speak over the mic, just?
I asked.
All right, so my question again is, at what point do the symbols and meanings of words, flags, etc., change over time? Because one thing I've noticed since coming to Japan is, for example, the swastika used in Buddhist temples and other religious things here or whatever. And it's just, it's not that it bothers me, it's just interesting to see how that symbol has changed into something that I'm used to it not being.
Okay, so for example, if it was inflammatory and now it's not, okay. So can I ask you a question in return? Do you feel like symbols need to change?
Well, I feel like symbols for example, the swastika, with how it's used now we see you have the swastika associated with white supremacy in the US and things like that. But at the same time, it can also be used here, but I think it's more based on the environmental context of it. And
So I think that here, what looks like the swastika is actually the swastika in reverse. It's not really exactly the same. And people do often confuse the two. So I'm not sure if the symbolism has changed. But I don't have a general answer for your question. But I will say this. So I got into a debate with, the same kid who, the boy told her little black girls how to get. I got in a debate with her, my oldest daughter and my youngest daughter, over the N-word, right? So there's no paradigm, and there's no point where I say it and it's cool, right? But the kids were like, no, we didn't say that. And so I don't know that the symbolism changed for me. It evolved for the next cycle, because she didn't have the experiences I had, and I didn't have the experiences my mother had. So I don't know if they need to change for me, but I'm glad she isn't as hurt about the word as I am. I just rather her not use it. So.
Yeah, that reminds, actually, that's a good point. Often, in terms of slurs, racial slurs, ethnic slurs, sexual slurs, groups often find a way to take that on and invert it, in fact, use it as a point of power rather than simply a slur. And we see that queers, we see that with lots of racial epithets, etc. And that's, I think, one process that, in a way, diminishes the power of those things to hurt. But again, we can never really predict what happens with symbols. In Japan, there's not a lot of awareness, historical awareness of what the swastika is, or why the swastika is different from the Star of David, etc. They can sort of float around in this sort of semiotic, soup with sort of very, very vague associations, and we see that happening in a lot of places in Asia, not just Japan, with a lot of symbols. So, that is maybe not an example, but in Japan, the nationalist flag is a very good example, the military flag, which, only is paraded by nationalists. So, if you wave the flag, that this is basically a right-wing group who's doing that.
So Jeff, is it Jeff? So I do appreciate your feedback. I just want to make sure that we can get all the questions in. But I thought that was a great question. A great question.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go home and tell my daughter I was right, but that's really hardly important.
Hi, my name is Austin. I'm a senior here at TUJ, and first of all, I want to say thank you to both of you for the presentation. I thought it was very interesting. And I have a very difficult question for you, Asby. And I know we're short on time, so I wrote everything down in advance, so I'm just kind of going to blast through it, but I hope you can follow along and answer to the best of your ability. So let me preface this by saying that throughout my 4 years here at TUJ, I have been racially profiled at an alarming rate, whether I was walking home, or even right outside here in Azerbaijan, this district we're in. When I reached out to TUJ for help, I was met with vitriol not just from students, some of which are in this room, but from staff as well. I was told that I should smile more, dress less ghetto, and one staff member even told me that I should be thankful I live in Japan because if this was in America, I would have been shot. And as you know, I would have just been another viral video that would scroll on your Facebook feed. So, in response to this, I went to the dean, and the dean did not take my word that this conversation even happened, because, as you know, Black people's word carries far less weight than that of our white counterparts. So, my question for you is, what are you doing to combat what white people say around you when there are no Black people in the room? What do you say when white people believe that you're in their corner, so to speak? How are you challenging their racist beliefs? You've talked about it a little bit throughout the questions that others have asked you, but I kind of want to interrogate you just a bit more, because it's one thing to donate the personal effects of your racist ancestors for history's sake, but it's another to actually antagonize whiteness as an entity and sort of relinquish that safety that you have by being one of them and actually go up and say what exactly is going on. Because racism can't be defeated with a passive stance. And when we as Black people are discriminated against, very oftentimes we do not have the luxury of choosing whether we want to be aggressive or passive. We're forced to make a decision because it's oftentimes a matter of life and death. So if you would like to respond to that.
I think I am pretty willing and ready to say in those situations that it's not right. Of course, everything depends on who they are, the relationship, who they are. But you know, the position that your question, you know, puts me in is in a way also just to defend my own whiteness, which maybe I need to be put in that position more often. Maybe most white people do. I would say that I'm fortunate that I don't find myself in many social situations like that. I'm here. I deal with other racial issues here instead, right? When I'm back home in New Orleans, I spend time with friends who are not that way. The most difficult one is when I'm with relatives at a family reunion, right? Or arguing on Facebook, where I literally had a cousin recently arguing that segregation is actually the best approach. Racial segregation is the best approach. And he used, you know, the bell curve, that book, as an example, and why, and this is based on his perspective. And of course, that led to an argument. I said, man, that is racist. That is you're just spouting textbook racism. Don't you see that? Trying to talk to him to get him to understand. And he had his own opinion why that was the case. But it was, you know, it required me to speak out. And I'd say I work on my family first, you know. I've had experiences as a youngster, you know, playing music with black friends, being attacked by gangs of whites because we were bringing the black guy to the white beach, right? And, you know, and it was really bloody, right? You know? And it doesn't make any of my friends who were defending our friend a hero, but it was like, well, fuck, these guys really are crazy that they will fight for this perceived right to keep their beach white to that degree. For us, it's just our friend, right? So, you know, it's a difficult situation, and I think white people also, those white people suss out how the other whites feel. And for a long time, it was, you know, they were ashamed to be openly racist. And that change in the last few years is something that disturbs me the most. So I guess that's all I can say about it, but it's a good question.
So, Austin, first I want to say that there's nothing more hurtful than to have been harmed and then disbelieved. Like, wow, twice? Thanks, right? So, and I want to say this, and this is, I do recognize this is going on YouTube, but it's a hugely unpopular position. But how many people have heard of the term white ally? Well, I have white allies. I got to tell you, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that term, that terminology, because what it does is I have the ownness of it, and then my white friends are helping me. And what I'm aware of is these things, as you pointed out, don't happen in enclaves I'm in. Like when I'm at, Cindy's house, I don't hear, I did hear that one time, but I don't hear, the racist comments. They don't happen when I'm around, which means I can't extinguish them. Which means I think I'm your ally. I'll help you out, but you gotta, we have to remind people that you have to clean your own house. So I'm always careful about the language of how do we move others, because again, it doesn't happen when I'm standing there. If it did, of course, I'd say something, but it never does. So it becomes incumbent upon you to turn to Aunt Carol and say, don't say that. You would be able to say that very easily if Uncle Bob said, ooh, I like that 10-year-old, right? You'd be able to say easily, Uncle Bob, don't do that, right? You wouldn't look to all the other 10-year-olds like, what you gonna say? Get him. Get your Uncle Bob. Okay? Also, come find me next time. I got you.
Hi, my name is Tyler, and I'm from Philadelphia. And I realize I don't have a lot of time, but this is a question for both of you. You were talking about the Jim Crow laws and eventually gerrymandering, and how different techniques used to preserve this kind of difference and different tools that are used. Do you think that the war on drugs is one of those tools that's used to unfairly separate or target or discriminate, or just preserve this sense of difference?
You want to unpack that? Wait. Short answer is yes.
That's my short answer.
Yeah. And then the long answer is, what are the possible good motivations for some better enforcement of drug laws that could happen and could lead to positive outcomes? And then why did this one go so badly and end up incarcerating so many minorities for what are relatively minor offenses? So I think, the short answer is yeah. And it comes also down to policing and who's getting picked up, where I'm getting let go. If the cops stop me and my friend, I get let go. Why is someone else not?
And it's not just that. I mean, we know that, for example, the disparity in sentencing, right? Crack versus cocaine and all. So the answer is yes. And that would be a period. Yeah, and I don't think it's a mystery. I'll just leave it at yes. So before I know Kyle's getting ready to come up, but I wanted to say to, let's see, Brittany and Jeff and Carlos and Brad and Austin and Alex, thank you very much for having the courage to come up and ask these questions. We have to do a lot more of this, right? We have to do a lot more of it candidly and constantly. Nothing else will change it. Nothing. All right? So give yourselves a hand. Thanks for coming to our TED Talk.